The chapel was already decorated when I canceled the wedding. White roses covered the aisle. Their scent hung heavy in the air, sweet and almost suffocating. Everyone said white roses symbolized pure love. That day they smelled like quiet lies. 30 minutes earlier we were standing at the altar during the rehearsal. The priest was explaining the vows while our families watched with happy smiles. Elena leaned closer to fix my tie. Her fingers trembled. Then she whispered something only I could hear. "You're not the one I love." Just 6 words. Soft, gentle, honest, and yet they shattered 5 years of my life. I looked into her eyes, waiting for a laugh, a correction, a mistake. But she only looked past me toward the chapel doors. That was when I understood. I wasn't the man she loved. I was the man she settled for. So before the vows could turn into a lifelong lie, I canceled the wedding. What I didn't know then was this. The man she truly loved was already inside that chapel, watching everything. And my silence ruined the future they thought they were about to steal. It was raining the day I met Elena. Not the loud, dramatic kind of rain that floods streets and sends people running for cover. This rain was quiet, patient, the kind that turns the city gray and reflective, as if the sky itself is lost in thought. I remember sitting by the window of a small bookstore cafe, watching droplets crawl slowly down the glass like hesitant tears. The world outside looked blurred, softened by the rain, and inside the cafe the air smelled like old paper coffee, and the faint sweetness of cinnamon pastries. It was the kind of place where time slowed down. The kind of place where lonely people pretended they weren't lonely. I had a book open in front of me, but I wasn't reading it. My pen moved quietly across the pages of my notebook instead, scratching out half-formed ideas and broken sentences. Writing had always been my refuge. When the world felt too confusing, stories gave it shape. Characters made choices, emotions had direction. Real life rarely did. I was halfway through describing a scene about a man waiting for someone who would never arrive when the bell above the cafe door chimed softly. I didn't look up at first. People came and went all the time. Students escaping the rain. Couples sharing quiet conversations. Writers like me pretending to work while secretly watching life pass by. But then I noticed someone standing beside my table. "Excuse me," a soft voice said. I looked up. She was holding a closed umbrella, tiny droplets still clinging to its edges. A few strands of dark hair had escaped from behind her ear, curling slightly from the damp air. Her coat was simple, beige and slightly oversized, but somehow it made her look like she belonged in the scene I had just been trying to write. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. I glanced at the empty chair across from me. "No," I said, a little too quickly. "It's not," she smiled, the kind of smile that appeared slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Good," she said as she sat down. "Every other table is full." Only then did I notice that she was right. The cafe had grown crowded while I was lost inside my notebook. Conversations hummed softly around us. Cups clinked against saucers. Somewhere near the counter, the espresso machine hissed like a tired dragon. For a moment, we sat in silence. She took off her coat, revealing a simple white sweater underneath. Her fingers wrapped around the warm coffee cup she had brought with her, and she sighed softly as if the warmth had reached deeper than just her hands. Then her eyes drifted toward my notebook. "Are you a writer?" she asked. I followed her gaze and felt a familiar wave of embarrassment. "Trying to be," I said. That answer always felt safer than calling myself one. She tilted her head slightly, studying the messy handwriting on the page. "Trying to be," she repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds honest." Most people either ignored notebooks or pretended to be impressed. She did neither. Her curiosity felt genuine, like someone opening a door without knowing what was on the other side. "What are you writing about?" she asked. I hesitated. "Just a story." "That's vague." I laughed quietly. "It's about a man who's waiting for someone who might never come." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That sounds sad. Most good stories are." She thought about that for a moment before nodding slowly. "True." Outside the rain tapped softly against the window, like fingers drumming against glass. "My name's Elena," she said suddenly, extending her hand across the table. "Elena Rivera." Her hand was warm. "Daniel," I replied, shaking it gently. "Nice to meet you, Daniel the almost writer." I smiled. "Nice to meet you too, Elena though." She laughed softly. "The exhausted event planner." "Event planner." She nodded, leaning back slightly in her chair. "Mostly weddings." Something about the way she said the word made it sound heavier than it should have been. "Weddings must be fun," I said. "All that love and celebration." Elena stirred her coffee slowly. "Sometimes." Her reflection flickered faintly in the rain-streaked window behind her. "Don't tell me you're one of those people who doesn't believe in love," I teased. "Oh, I believe in love," she said quickly. Then she paused. "I'm just not always sure people know what they're promising when they stand at the altar." The way she said it made something shift quietly inside me. I closed my notebook. "What do you mean?" She traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "Every week I watch couples promise forever in front of hundreds of people," she said. "They smile, they cry, they hold each other like nothing in the world could ever separate them." "That sounds beautiful." "It is," she agreed softly. Then her voice dropped slightly. But sometimes, when everyone else leaves and the decorations are being packed away, I see the way they look at each other. And sometimes they already look tired. The rain outside grew slightly heavier, turning the streetlights into soft halos of gold. Maybe they're just overwhelmed, I said. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. For a while we talked about simpler things, books we loved, movies that had made us cry when we didn't expect them to, the strange comfort of rainy afternoons when the world feels quieter than usual. I learned that Elena had moved to the city 3 years earlier. That she loved old bookstores more than modern ones. That she believed every person secretly carried a story they were afraid to tell. And you? She asked eventually. What about me? Why do you write? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at my notebook again. Because real life doesn't make sense, I almost said. Because stories are easier than people. But instead I shrugged lightly. I guess I'm trying to understand things. Like what? Why people stay? I said quietly. And why they leave. Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead she watched the rain sliding down the glass, her expression thoughtful. You know, she said finally, people always look happiest at weddings. That's kind of the point. She smiled faintly. But sometimes I wonder if they're not happy because they found the right person. I raised an eyebrow. Then why? Her eyes shifted back to mine. Because they're afraid to leave. The words settled between us like a quiet shadow. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded so strangely dramatic for a rainy afternoon conversation. You've been working around weddings too long, I said. Probably, she admitted with a soft smile. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. Light filtered through the clouds, turning the wet streets into shimmering mirrors. I glanced at the clock on the cafe wall and realized 3 hours had passed. Wow, I said. I didn't realize it was getting so late. Mine neither. She looked almost surprised. We gathered our things slowly, like two strangers reluctant to break the strange bubble of conversation that had formed around our table. At the door, Elena hesitated. Then she reached into my notebook, tore off the corner of one page, and scribbled something quickly. Her number. She folded the paper and handed it back to me. Call me when you finish that story, she said. I smiled. I will. But as she stepped out into the damp evening and disappeared into the fading rain, I realized something strange. For the first time in weeks, I had forgotten to keep writing, and somehow, without realizing it, the story I had been trying to create inside my notebook had quietly stepped into real life. Back then, I thought Elena Rivera had simply been a pleasant stranger on a rainy afternoon. I didn't know that one day she would become the most important chapter of my life, or that the story she had just walked into would eventually end at the altar of a wedding that never happened. Our relationship didn't begin with fireworks. It grew slowly, quietly, like rain filling a lake you pass every day without noticing it's rising. After that afternoon in the bookstore cafe, Elena began appearing in my life the way soft music slips into the background of a room. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just often enough that her presence started to feel natural. The first time we met again, the sky was clear, no rain, no gray clouds, just a pale winter sun stretching weak light across the sidewalks. She texted me 2 days after our first meeting. Did the writer finish his story yet? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. The writer got distracted. Her response came almost instantly. Good. Let's get coffee again. That became our pattern. Coffee shops, quiet bookstores, walks through streets that glowed softly under streetlights. Elena loved small moments. She noticed things most people ignored. The way warm air escapes cafes when someone opens the door. The quiet hum of a late night train passing in the distance. The way rainwater collects in the cracks of old pavement. Little things matter. She told me once as we walked along the river one evening. The water reflected the lights of passing cars like shattered stars. Big moments are rare, she said, but small ones happen every day. I think that was when I started falling for her. Not during some dramatic confession. Not during a kiss, but during those quiet observations she made about the world, as if she saw meaning hidden inside ordinary things. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted around us. Winter softened into spring, and the air began to carry the scent of blooming trees. Sometimes she came to my apartment after work. She would sit beside me while I wrote, not talking, just being there. At first, it made me nervous. Writing is a strange kind of vulnerability. When someone reads your thoughts before they're finished, it feels like standing in a room without walls. But Elena never rushed me. She watched quietly, her chin sometimes resting on my shoulder as my pen moved across the page. One night, while the city outside our window was drenched in rain, she whispered something that made me pause. You see the world differently. Her breath was warm against my ear. I stopped writing and looked at her. Is that a good thing? I asked. She smiled, not the playful smile she often used when teasing me. This one was softer, more thoughtful. It's beautiful. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten, not painfully, just enough to remind me that someone was looking at me in a way I wasn't used to. For most of my life I had felt invisible. Writers spend a lot of time observing other people's stories. We rarely expect to become someone worth observing ourselves. But Alina watched me like I mattered. And slowly, that feeling changed everything. We began creating routines without realizing it. Sunday mornings meant breakfast at a small cafe near the park. The same corner table. The same waitress who always remembered Alina's order. Friday nights meant walking through the night market downtown, where the smell of street food mixed with laughter and music. Sometimes we bought cheap pastries and sat on a bench watching strangers pass by. Elena loved guessing their stories. That couple just had their first date, she would say quietly. How do you know? They're trying too hard not to smile. Or, that man just got bad news. What makes you think that? The way he keeps checking his phone. I always laughed when she did that. You should write stories, I told her once. She shook her head. I help organize people's happiest days. That's enough storytelling for me. Weddings again? She nodded. Every week. Different couple. Same promises. And you still don't believe them? She looked at me then, really looked. I believe them when they say them. And afterward. Her eyes drifted away. I'm just not sure they always understand what they're promising. At the time, I thought she was simply being philosophical. Now, looking back, I wonder if she was already speaking from experience. The first time I kissed her was during one of our late-night walks. The city had gone quiet, the way it does after midnight when even the traffic seems to breathe more slowly. We were standing under a street lamp, its light turning the pavement gold. Alina was telling me about a wedding disaster that had happened earlier that day. The groom fainted during the vows. She said, laughing softly. From nerves, from dehydration, she corrected. Apparently he forgot to drink water the entire day. Romantic, very. The wind lifted a strand of her hair across her face. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it aside. For a moment neither of us moved. Then she leaned forward slightly. The kiss was gentle, tentative, like two people stepping onto unfamiliar ground. When we pulled away, Alina smiled quietly. Well, she said. Well what? I asked. I guess that answers something. What? She shrugged lightly. That the writer isn't as shy as he pretends to be. From that night on, the distance between us slowly disappeared. Months later she moved into my apartment. Not with a dramatic decision, just one suitcase at first, then another. Then suddenly her sweaters filled half my closet, and her coffee mugs replaced the ones I had been using for years. Our lives blended together in small, ordinary ways. We argued about grocery lists. We watched movies until she fell asleep halfway through. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and found her curled against me, breathing softly. Those moments felt peaceful, like the world had finally become simple. 2 years passed like that. 2 quiet years where nothing seemed to break. Then one evening, while Elena was out meeting a client, I found myself standing on our balcony. The city below glowed with thousands of tiny lights. I had been thinking about something for weeks, maybe months. The idea had started small, but it kept returning, growing louder each time. Marriage. Not because I believed love needed a ceremony, but because I wanted permanence. I wanted the future with her to stop feeling temporary, so I planned something simple. Elena never liked grand gestures anyway. The next evening, I hung a string of fairy lights along the balcony railing. Their soft glow turned the small space into something almost magical. The air smelled faintly like rain. Far below, cars moved slowly through the city streets. When Alina stepped outside, she looked confused. What's all this? She asked. I felt suddenly nervous. More nervous than I had ever been in my life. I thought we could have dinner out here tonight. I said. She smiled. You're being suspiciously romantic. Am I? Definitely. We sat together for a while, eating quietly and watching the lights of the city flicker like distant stars. My heart pounded the entire time. Finally, when the moment felt right, or maybe when I couldn't wait any longer, I reached into my pocket. Elena? She looked at me. Yes. I opened the small box. The ring caught the fairy lights and reflected them in tiny flashes of gold. For a moment she didn't move. Then her eyes filled with tears. Are you serious? She whispered. Yes. I suddenly felt incredibly vulnerable. Like I had just handed someone my entire future and asked them to hold it carefully. I love you, I said quietly. I want to keep building this life with you. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth. Daniel. Then she nodded quickly. Yes. She said. Yes. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, she started crying. Not loudly. Just soft tears that caught the glow of the fairy lights. We held each other for a long time on that balcony. And in that moment, the future felt so simple. A home, stories, maybe children one day. Maybe a little house somewhere quieter than the city. I believed we were building something real, something strong. But love doesn't always break like glass. It doesn't always shatter in a single dramatic moment. Sometimes it fades quietly, like music slowly lowering in volume until one person realizes they're the only one still listening. 6 months before the wedding, Adrian returned. At first, his presence was nothing more than a whisper in our lives. A name casually mentioned during dinner. An old friend from college, Elena said, smiling lightly like it was a story she told to amuse herself. I nodded, sipping my wine, pretending not to notice the subtle warmth in her tone when she said it. The first few mentions were harmless. Innocent even. I convinced myself I was imagining things, too many late night hours, too many quiet moments when she would laugh softly at her phone, or stare into it as if it held a world only she could see. Then the stories grew, the phone calls lengthened. Nights grew later. There were texts that I glimpsed before she hid them, brief flashes of words like "remember when," or "can you help me with this project? He's starting a business." She explained one night as we sat on the balcony. The city sprawled below us, tiny lights shimmering like distant stars reflected in water. Needed advice. I just helped him a little. Her voice was calm, casual. But I heard the softness beneath it. The tone reserved only for people you love in ways you can't admit. I wanted to confront her, to ask why he mattered so much. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I focused on my pen and the notebook that always sat beside me, pretending that stories could somehow anchor me while my heart drifted. The nights began to feel different. I would wake, not from dreams, but from the faint echo of her laughter lingering in the apartment after she had fallen asleep. Sometimes, I'd sit in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, imagining her in conversation with him. What words did she say that made her eyes shine the way they did when she looked at me? Then I found the album. I had been looking for a book she had borrowed from the cafe we loved. It had slipped between the cushions of the couch. I pulled it out, but something else tumbled onto the floor. A dusty photo album, one she had forgotten to hide. Curiosity overrode caution. I opened it slowly, almost reverently, as if the paper itself might burn me. Inside were pictures of them together. Young, carefree, smiling at the camera, or laughing at something the other said, entirely unaware of the world around them. Fingers intertwined beneath the summer sky. Sunlight falling across their shoulders, hair glowing like threads of gold. It was beautiful, it was raw, it was perfect, and it broke something in me. I held the photograph for what felt like hours, tracing the edges with my thumb, wondering how many days, months, years of her life had been spent with him. Not just passing moments, but those invisible ones. The ones that leave fingerprints on your heart, even when you think they're gone. I confronted her gently because I needed to. I had to understand. That was a long time ago, she said, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. Her eyes drifted away. I studied her carefully. The words were true. It was in the timing, the way she avoided my gaze, the faint tremor in her fingers as she tucked the album away, that told me the truth she wouldn't say aloud. Some love stories don't end, they wait. They linger quietly, patient and insistent, until the right moment arrives. Over the following weeks, I noticed the subtle ways he infiltrated our lives. A message on her phone I didn't see but sensed. A name mentioned casually over dinner. A laugh that came too easily when she recounted a story about him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear down the walls of our apartment and demand her honesty. But I didn't. I became the observer, silently watching the way she carried memories of him with her. Memories that didn't include me. One rainy evening, I found myself at the cafe where we first met. The same spot by the window. The smell of coffee, paper, and rain clung to the air, reminding me of the way we first talked for hours without realizing time had passed. I traced the outline of her face in my mind, imagining the way she would smile at him now as if no one else existed. I wrote furiously that night, not stories about us, about him, about the ghost that had returned to haunt the life I had been building. Words poured out of me, sharp and bitter and aching, each sentence a reminder that love can exist in absence as easily as in presence. When I confronted her again, months later, it was subtle. I found the album, I said. Not a question, not a demand, just a statement. Her hands paused mid-motion, resting on the counter as if she'd been caught mid-thought. I thought you didn't want to see it, she murmured, avoiding my eyes. I didn't, I said, but it found me anyway. She exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and fear. I never meant to hide him, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the words weighed heavily between us. It was a part of my past. Something I couldn't erase. I nodded, though every fiber in me ached. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that the past had no hold over the present. But I couldn't. The photograph, the laughter, the traces of a love that had shaped her before me. They all whispered a truth I wasn't ready to ignore. Somewhere in the apartment, her laughter lingered even when she wasn't there. Adrian wasn't just a memory. He was a shadow that stretched across our evenings, our conversations, our quiet dinners. And the more I tried to forget him, the more I saw his reflection in the corners of our lives. I began noticing the subtle cracks in our perfection. The way she would pause mid-sentence, lost in thought. The way her eyes would soften when she spoke of him to herself, not me. The way I would catch her staring at her phone and pretend I didn't notice, while my stomach nodded with unspoken questions. And I knew that some love stories never die, they wait quietly. For the right moment, for the wrong person to come along and unravel everything. One night, I found a letter tucked behind the spine of the album. Her handwriting was familiar, elegant. I hope you understand someday. I hope I can make this right. But some things never fade. I didn't read further. Some things were better left unknown. I placed the letter back, feeling the weight of it pressing against my chest like the heaviest of stones. That night, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of rain against our windows. My pen sat untouched on the desk, my heart beat too fast and too slow at the same time. The shadows of past love had returned, and I could feel them curling around our life like smoke, delicate yet suffocating. The man from her past wasn't just a name anymore, he was a presence, a threat, a reminder. And I didn't know how to fight something I couldn't see, only feel. I thought love was simple. I thought devotion could survive anything. But sometimes, love isn't enough when ghosts linger in the spaces between us. I began to notice how she unconsciously compared the two of us. Not openly, not maliciously. Just subtle gestures, the smallest glances, the unspoken sighs. And I began to fear a truth I didn't want to accept. Sometimes, the heart remembers what it cannot forget, even when the mind tries to move on. And the worst part, I still loved her. Even as I traced the photo of her and Adrian in my mind, even as I felt the shadows of their past intertwining with the present. I was standing at the edge of a storm I could not see coming. And all I could do was hold on to her, fragile as she was, knowing that sometimes, love waits quietly for the wrong person to realize they might have already lost everything. Candles lined the aisle, their flames flickering gently like hearts struggling to stay warm in a cold room. The air smelled faintly of white roses, their delicate scent so sweet it almost drowned out the faint rustle of silk and murmured greetings from our families. Everything glowed under soft golden lights, reflecting off polished wood and marble floors. It was the kind of beauty people called magical, the kind meant for photographs and memories. And I was standing in the middle of it, wearing a suit I had chosen months ago, waiting to step into a future I thought was ours. Elena stood beside me adjusting my tie. Her fingers brushed my collar soft and trembling, and I felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the chapel's air conditioning. "You're nervous," I whispered, trying to anchor the moment with my voice. She leaned closer, her breath brushing my ear. Warm, familiar, intimate. But something was off. I could feel it in the tension of her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on my tie a moment too long, and the faint tremble in her hands. Then she said it. "You're not the one I love." The words hung between us, sharp and fragile, like glass suspended in air. They cut through the music in the background, the whispers of our families, even the scent of roses. Time stopped. The candle flames froze mid-flicker. The wooden pews seemed to hold their breath. I didn't move. My hands clutched the lapels of my jacket as though I could steady myself, steady the world. "Then why marry me?" I asked, voice barely audible, though I felt it echo in my own chest. Her eyes did not waver. She did not look guilty. She looked relieved, almost free, as though confessing this truth had lifted a weight she had carried for years. She began, then faltered. Her lips parted, then closed again. She turned slightly toward the chapel doors. Her gaze lingered there, distant, expectant, like a candle burning for someone who had yet to arrive. And suddenly, it all made sense. I understood then what had been whispered through her actions long before these words. The late nights on the phone, the subtle smiles when Adrian's name slipped into conversation, the quiet longing I had refused to see, all of it. He was here. I felt it in the stiffening of her spine, the slight shift of her weight, the way the air between us suddenly seemed colder. I swallowed hard. The knot in my chest tightened. "You were waiting," I said softly, though I didn't know if I was asking a question or stating a fact. She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted, and her hand brushed mine, briefly, on my shoulder, not affectionately, not regretfully, just lightly, like someone closing a door without looking back. My mind raced, replaying months of subtle hints I had ignored, the phone calls, the forgotten albums, the whispered laughter I had mistaken for nothing. I tried to speak again, but the words failed me. Everything we had built, our late night walks, the soft laughter over coffee, the tiny rituals that made me think we were a we, collapsed in a single instant. The aisle stretched ahead of us, empty now. Candles flickered along its length, casting shadows that danced like memories I could no longer touch. The roses, once sweet, now smelled like betrayal, fragile, beautiful, and fleeting. I could feel my fingers trembling. My heart thrummed in my chest like a bird desperate to escape its cage. Then a soft noise caught my attention. The chapel doors opened slowly, the sound muted but deliberate. The light from outside spilled across the floor, and there he was. Adrian, not smiling, not smug. Just there, watching, waiting, patient, calm, like a predator who had found exactly what he had come for. Elena's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. The relief, the anticipation, the quiet surrender. It was all there. I had never seen her look at me like that. Not ever. I stepped back instinctively. The world shifted. The floor seemed to fall out from under me. "You," I whispered, my throat tight, my mind unable to process the weight of the scene. She looked at me one last time, and there was no hesitation, no apology in her gaze. Only clarity, only truth. "You were never the one I loved," she said softly, almost to herself. Then she turned and walked toward him. And in that moment I realized love could be so cruelly cinematic. It could build you up like a tower of glass, gleaming and perfect, only to shatter silently in the most beautiful room you could imagine. I felt the chapel tilt. The walls seemed to close in, and the music, once a soft, comforting backdrop, now became a haunting melody. It twisted through my chest and hollowed out my stomach. I took a shaky breath and realized that no amount of reasoning could change this. No argument, no declaration, no promises I had made in my heart. The man she truly loved had arrived, and I was a ghost in my own story. I looked down at the rings we had carefully chosen together. The boxes rested on the altar. I had touched them this morning, imagining the moment I would slide them onto her finger. Now they felt like weights, heavy and meaningless. I bent slightly, picked up the box with trembling hands and placed it back on the altar. The gold inside gleamed under the candlelight, not a promise, not a bond, just a silent witness to what had just ended. The chapel air was thick with tension. Every whisper from our families seemed distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. Alina reached Adrian, and they shared a smile, a slow, quiet acknowledgement that they belonged together. Not theatrically, not dramatically, just naturally, inevitably. I turned away. My shoes scraped softly against the wooden floor as I walked toward the exit. My hands felt numb, my chest hollow. A soft gust of wind met me as I stepped outside, carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. The world outside was calm, almost indifferent, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I stopped for a moment, leaning against the cold stone of the chapel. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and stunned. I thought about our late night walks, the coffee shops where she had laughed quietly at my awkward jokes, the fairy lights on our balcony, the soft tears she had cried when I proposed. It all felt like another life. A life that existed only because I had allowed myself to believe in her. Now I realized something I had never wanted to face. Love doesn't always end with happiness. Sometimes it ends in clarity, sometimes in surrender, sometimes in silence, and sometimes the person you thought you knew best belongs to someone else. The rain started again lightly, washing over the cobblestone streets. Each drop felt like a pulse, measuring the rhythm of my broken heart. I pulled my coat tighter around me, but warmth felt impossible. Somewhere, distant but sharp in the mind, I heard Elena's laughter, soft and familiar, drifting back toward the chapel doors. It wasn't mine. It never would be. And as the chapel faded behind me, flickering candlelight through stained glass windows, I realized I had just witnessed the final act of a story I had helped write. Only I had been nothing more than a character waiting for someone else's plot to unfold. I walked away slowly, footsteps echoing softly in the rain, knowing that some truths, like her love for Adrian, could never be rewritten. Some doors, once opened, could never close again. And the hardest part of all, I was the only one standing outside, watching the life I thought was mine dissolve in silence. "30 minutes later I stood at the front of the chapel, heart pounding like a drum that refused to stop. The stained glass windows cast fractured light across the aisle, painting the polished floor in shards of color that felt almost cruel. Candles flickered as if sensing the tension in the room, their flames trembling. Everything looked the same as it had for the rehearsal. The roses, the pews, the soft hum of music in the background. And yet, nothing looked the same anymore. I took a deep breath. The world felt impossibly heavy, every breath sharp, every heartbeat echoing against the walls. My family, her family, our friends, all eyes were on me. My mother's face was pale, confusion etched across every line. Her father's jaw was tight. I could see the question forming, unspoken, in the furrow of his brow. I didn't speak. Words would have shattered into useless fragments, incapable of containing what I felt. Some truths are too raw, too jagged, to be delivered with ceremony. They demand silence. I lifted my hand and slowly removed the ring. The gold glinted in the candlelight, reflecting the chapel's glow like a star unwilling to fall. My fingers trembled. I placed it gently on the altar, as if laying down a burden I had carried silently for too long. The sound of the metal brushing against the marble felt deafening. I could feel the gasps ripple through the room. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs into shocked silence. Then I turned and walked toward the chapel doors. Each step was deliberate, each step a defiance against the expectations that had been placed upon me for months. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I let the hushed voices follow me like echoes fading into the distance. The evening air greeted me with a chill, carrying the faint scent of rain and the damp earth. Streetlights stretched long shadows across the cobblestone path. The world outside was calm, unassuming, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. And then I saw him, Adrian. He stood near the chapel entrance, hands in his pockets, his posture casual but his eyes sharp. He didn't look surprised. He wasn't angry or triumphant. He was simply waiting, patient, the way someone waits for a story to reach its natural conclusion. For a moment I froze. The weight of it pressed down on me. The truth I had carried quietly for months, the clarity of the final act. I realized something strange, something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I hadn't ruined their love story. I hadn't shattered their happiness. I had merely stepped out of it, taken off the costume of a character who was never meant to play the lead. Freedom is strange, quiet, almost imperceptible, yet in that instant I felt it flooding through me, mingling with the sting of heartbreak and betrayal. Adrian's gaze met mine, steady and calm, acknowledging without speaking that the path ahead belonged to someone else. Elena was behind him, laughing softly at something he said. That laugh, once mine in memory, now belonged entirely to another. And for the first time in months, I let myself stop fighting it. I walked past them, past the gentle chatter and shocked whispers, toward the rain-slicked streets. Each step was lighter than the last, not because the world had changed, but because I had. The rain began softly, the droplets cold against my skin, washing away the remnants of a life I had tried so hard to believe in. I raised my face to the sky, letting the water mix with the tears I hadn't let fall inside the chapel. The world smelled of wet asphalt and possibility. Sometimes walking away from a lie is the first act of courage you can take for yourself, and sometimes, it becomes the first chapter of the life you were truly meant to live. I wandered aimlessly, letting the city lights guide me, until I found myself in the old bookstore cafe where I had first met Alina. The smell of paper and coffee greeted me like an old friend, but even here, memories clung stubbornly to the corners. I sat at our favorite table, tracing the edges of the seat with my fingers, imagining the stories I would write now. Not for her, not for him, but for me. I pulled out my notebook. My pen hovered, hesitant at first, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Then I began to write. Not about love, not about loss, not about betrayal. I wrote about freedom, about rain, about walking into a night that was mine and mine alone. Somewhere deep inside I felt the first fragile flicker of peace. The achy of unrequited love was still there, raw and tender, but it was mingled with something new, hope. Because endings are never truly endings. They are doors. And the door I had just opened, wet with rain and heavy with truth, was leading me toward the life I was meant to create. Adrian and Elena were behind me. Their story would continue, and I would no longer be a shadow in it. I closed my eyes, listening to the city breathe, feeling the rain soak into my hair, my coat, my soul. For the first time in months I could exhale, and somewhere in that quiet, in that space between heartbreak and liberation, I realized that sometimes, the bravest love story is the one you write for yourself. I stood, wiped my notebook dry, and walked into the night, letting the rain guide me forward, toward the life I was finally ready to live.